On the day he turned 40, James Carter walked into his office with a heart full of gratitude and walked out with a box full of memories. No warning, no explanation, just a cold, "You're no longer needed," on his birthday. What was supposed to be a celebration became the moment everything collapsed. But what no one expected, not even James, is that this fall would become the beginning of the greatest comeback of his life. A story about pain, resilience, and a dream carved from wood and soul, from being humiliated in front of everyone, to returning years later, not as an employee, but as the man who bought the company that once threw him away. And if you're here because life has ever knocked you down or made you feel like you're not enough, you're in the right place. Subscribe to the channel and stay with us, because this story might just change the way you see your own. It was early morning, the kind of morning that carries a sense of hope. The sun was streaming in gently, and I remember smiling to myself as I sipped my coffee. It was my birthday, not just any birthday, my 40th, a milestone, a turning point. My wife had left a small note on the kitchen table with a little drawing our daughter made. "Daddy, happy birthday, you're our hero." My heart swelled. Life wasn't perfect, but that moment was. I arrived at the company early, as I always did. I had been there for nearly 12 years, loyal, consistent, and honestly, one of the top performers. The office felt like a second home, and I believed, maybe foolishly, that I was part of something that mattered. My colleagues greeted me with birthday wishes, and a few even talked about lunch plans to celebrate. Everything felt normal, until it wasn't. At 10:17 a.m. I got the call to go into the manager's office. There was a strange silence when I walked in. No smiles, no congratulations, just the cold presence of my supervisor and an HR representative. My heart started pounding. Before a single word was spoken. "We're letting you go," they said. No warning, no signs, just like that. The floor beneath me gave way. I sat there, frozen. The words echoed in my head. "Is this some kind of mistake?" I asked, half laughing, half despairing. But they were already sliding the exit documents across the table. On my birthday. 12 years. Gone in less than 12 minutes. I walked out of that room carrying a box of my things, and a silence so heavy it felt like grief. As I stepped into the elevator, I could feel the looks, the pity, the whispers. My celebration had turned into humiliation. But what hurt most wasn't just the betrayal. It was the feeling of being invisible, disposable, forgotten. I drove home in silence, trying to hold back the tears. My daughter's drawing was still on the table when I walked in. "You're our hero." And in that moment I didn't feel like one at all. But life has a way of turning door into destino, even when we can't see it yet. It was early morning, the kind of morning that carries a quiet hope. James Carter, a man of resilience and humble roots, poured himself a cup of coffee in the kitchen he built with his own hands. It was his 40th birthday, a number that meant something. His wife had left a handwritten note beside his mug, with a drawing from their 6-year-old daughter. "Happy birthday, Daddy, you're our hero." He smiled. That simple gesture felt like a warm hug from life itself. James arrived at the office as usual, 15 minutes before anyone else. For 12 years he'd given everything to that company. Loyalty, late nights, and results no one could deny. He truly believed his work mattered. His co-workers greeted him with pats on the back and jokes about turning the Big Four Nero. A few even talked about sneaking out for lunch to celebrate. It felt like a good day until it didn't. At 10:17 a.m., James received a sudden message. "Please see Mr. Bennett in his office." Richard Bennett, the kind of boss who wore expensive suits but had a colder heart than winter rain. James walked in expecting a simple check-in or maybe a birthday greeting. What he got instead was a face void of emotion, sitting next to an HR rep who avoided eye contact. "We're letting you go, James," Bennett said bluntly, as if firing. Someone on their birthday was just another task on his to-do list. James froze. "Excuse me?" he muttered, confused. "Is this some kind of joke?" But no one laughed. Papers were slid across the table with cold efficiency. No explanation. That made sense. No appreciation, no warning, just, "You're done here." James gathered his few belongings in a box, walking past desks that once felt like home, now feeling like a stranger in a place he helped build. The sting wasn't just the loss of a job. It was the betrayal by a man he had trusted. By a system that only saw numbers, not hearts. When he got home, still in disbelief, he saw the drawing again on the table. "You're our hero." His throat tightened. In that moment, he didn't feel like a hero. He felt discarded, broken, lost. But what James didn't know was that this heartbreak was the start of something far greater. The days after James's dismissal were a blur. He moved through his house like a ghost, present but not really there. His daughter would run to him with her usual joy, but James couldn't meet her eyes for long. He felt like a disappointment. His wife tried to reassure him, saying things like, "We'll get through this together." But even her warmth couldn't reach the weight he carried inside. It wasn't just a job he lost. It was his identity, his dignity, and the sense of security he had spent years building. Bills started piling up. The mortgage, groceries, school fees. James began selling off tools from his workshop just to keep the lights on. He tried to find work elsewhere, but rejection after rejection drained what little hope he had left. At interviews, they'd glance at his age or skim his resume with indifference. "You're overqualified," some would say. Others didn't even call back. He started questioning everything: his worth, his place in the world, even his faith. "Why, God? Why on my birthday?" he whispered one night in the dark, tears finally escaping where pride had long held them in. And then came the day he saw Mr. Bennett again. By accident. James had gone to the grocery store for some bread and eggs. There, in the parking lot, stood Richard Bennett, laughing, smug, stepping out of a brand new car, surrounded by two younger executives James had once mentored himself. Bennett didn't see James, or worse, maybe he did, and just chose to look through him like glass. That moment burned. It wasn't just anger. It was humiliation reborn. That night, James stood in his garage, surrounded by dust, old tools, and dreams that had no place to go. He sat in the same chair where years ago he'd built a dollhouse for his daughter, and this time he wasn't thinking about wood or screws. He was thinking about purpose, about legacy, about how easily a man could be erased, unless he decided to write himself back into the story. And somewhere in that silence a fire began to flicker, small, weak, but alive. James couldn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark garage long after everyone in the house had gone to bed. His mind wouldn't stop racing. He replayed every moment, every sacrifice he had made for that company. And now, nothing. No acknowledgement, no thank you. Just a silent fall. But as the hours dragged on, something shifted. Maybe it was the weight of the silence. Or maybe it was that small, stubborn part of him, the one that had always survived, that began to speak. He opened his old toolbox and ran his fingers over the worn handles of tools he'd barely used in years. Each one carried a memory. A shelf he built, a neighbor he helped, a favor he never charged for. James had always had a gift with his hands, the kind of skill that couldn't be taught in a boardroom. And in that quiet moment, a thought crossed his mind. What if I built something of my own? What if I stopped begging for a seat and built my own table? The idea felt ridiculous at first. He had no money, no investors, no plan. Just a fire in his gut and a heart full of questions. But something about it wouldn't let go. For the first time in weeks, James didn't feel numb. He felt restless, alive. So he stayed up that night sketching ideas. Not grand business plans, just simple drawings, furniture, custom pieces. Things he could make with his hands, things that mattered. He didn't tell his wife at first. He wasn't sure if it would lead anywhere, and the last thing he wanted was to give false hope. But he started spending more and more time in the garage, clearing out space, fixing up old tools, watching tutorials late into the night. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was movement. And after being stuck in grief for so long, even a small step forward felt like a revolution. Still, James had no idea that this quiet act of building would one day shake the very foundations of the world that once rejected him. In the beginning, James worked in silence. No grand announcements, no social media posts, just wood, sweat, and hope. He started by crafting a small coffee table from leftover oak, sanding it by hand until the grain shone like gold under the sunlight. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. It carried a piece of him. And for the first time in months, James stood back and felt proud. He posted a photo of the table on a local marketplace website, thinking nothing of it. 2 days later, a woman messaged him asking if he could make a matching bench. Then another person asked about a custom bookshelf. Word spread slowly but steadily. His garage began to fill with wood, orders, and something even more precious, purpose. It wasn't much money, but it was honest, sacred work. Work that healed. His wife noticed the change in his eyes. Less weight, more light. One evening, she brought him a cup of coffee and sat beside him while he worked. "You're building more than furniture, James," she said softly. "You're building yourself again." Those words sank deep into his bones, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to smile, not out of politeness, but from real quiet joy. Still, doubts lingered. At night, he wondered if this small thing could ever truly replace what he'd lost. Could this garage ever compete with the corner office where Mr. Bennett sat with his tailored arrogance? Could handmade tables ever outshine corporate strategy? The voice of fear whispered often, but James kept moving, because sometimes believing in yourself isn't about being sure. It's about showing up, even when you're not. A few months had passed since James crafted his first piece of furniture. His hands had become calloused again, but his heart was healing. Orders increased, not apenas por causa da beleza das peças, mas pela história por trás delas. Clients would message saying, "I can feel the heart in your work," or "It reminds me of my father's old table." James wasn't just building furniture. He was restoring memorias, resgatando sentimentos. Then, something unexpected happened. A local interior designer contacted him. She had seen one of his pieces in a client's home and wanted to collaborate. "Your work has a soul, Mr. Carter," she said. The two began a partnership. She'd bring design projects, he'd bring craftsmanship. Slowly, what was once a survival hustle began turning into a legitimate business. James filed a name for his small company, Carter and Soul, a tribute to the work and the wounds that had shaped it. But growth came with pressure. Deadlines, demands, logistics. James wasn't trained to run a business. He was just a man trying to feed his family. There were nights when he sat in front of invoices he didn't know how to read, frustrated and ashamed. He even considered giving up. "Maybe I'm not cut out for this," he'd whisper, looking at his trembling hands. That inner voice, the one Mr. Bennett had fed for years, still whispered that he was small, replaceable, temporary. One night, after a long day and an almost failed delivery, James came home to find his daughter asleep in the living room, hugging one of his wood samples. She had drawn a tiny heart on it and written, "Daddy's Dream." James stood there for a long time, no words, just the quiet ache of someone realizing he wasn't building a business, he was building a future. But as his light began to shine, the past, cruel and silent, still had plans to test him. It was a rainy Tuesday when James received the invitation, though invitation might be too formal a word. The interior designer he had partnered with had just closed a deal to furnish the lobby and executive floors of a major corporate building. A huge contract, life-changing. She wanted James to come meet the client in person. "It's a big deal, James. They want to see the face behind the work." She smiled. He hesitated. Something in her voice told him it wasn't just any building. When? He walked into the high-rise 2 days later, his breath caught in his chest. The logo on the glass door hit him like a punch. Bennett & Co. The same company that threw him out like trash on his 40th birthday. The same chair where Richard Bennett had once sat to strip James of his dignity now waited for him to walk in as a potential supplier. For a moment, James stood still. The hallway looked the same, but he was different. He remembered the way people had avoided his eyes the day he left, carrying that brown box. Now he walked in wearing a tailored shirt, confident posture, and the weight of 1,000 lessons etched into every step. But when the door opened and he saw Mr. Bennett's face again, smug, graying, unchanged, something deep inside James stirred. Not hate, not revenge, something more complex and more powerful. Bennett didn't recognize him at first, or maybe he pretended not to. But the moment their eyes met, time froze. There was silence. Then James extended his hand. Steady, firm. "James Carter, I'll be furnishing your lobby." Bennett blinked. The name must have hit him like an echo from a nightmare. And in that split second, James saw it. The shift, the doubt, the discomfort. James didn't need revenge. He had something Melhor, dignidad. But the meeting wasn't over, and Bennett wasn't the type to surrender without a game of power. The meeting room was elegant, but cold, just like Bennett himself. He sat back in his leather chair, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "So, you're the carpenter," he finally said, the word laced with passive disdain. James didn't flinch. He simply smiled. "I prefer designer and founder these days," he replied, his tone calm but firm. There was no anger in his voice, only quiet strength, and that shook Bennett more than any outburst ever could. Bennett tried to reassert control, asking about delivery timelines, pricing, bulk orders. He questioned James's ability to handle a contract of that size. "We need professionals who can scale," he said with a patronizing smirk. James leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. "Mr. Bennett, I've scaled things far harder than furniture. I rebuilt a life from nothing. This project is just wood and time." The silence that followed was thick with tension and respect, whether Bennett admitted it or not. As the presentation went on, one of the new executives, younger, ambitious, sharp, turned to James with genuine curiosity. "Your story. It's inspiring. How did you get here?" James paused. "Failure," he said, "and faith. Some days both felt like the same thing." Even Bennett looked away for a second, as if those words stung more than expected. The room wasn't just seeing a carpenter. They were seeing a man who had walked through fire and didn't smell like smoke. The contract was approved on the spot. Not because of charity, but because the work was excellent, because James Carter had earned it. He gathered his documents, stood up, and walked toward the exit. But just as he reached the door, Bennett called out, "Carter, do you ever think about coming back here, as part of the leadership?" James stopped. He turned, met his eyes, and said with quiet conviction, "I didn't come back to belong again, Mr. Bennett. I came back to prove I never needed your permission to build something greater." And he walked out, not in defeat, but in legacy. Weeks later, the furniture was delivered, every piece crafted with perfection and soul. The lobby of Bennett & Co. was unrecognizable. The wood warmed the space that had previously seemed impersonal and cold. Employees praised the details, unaware that it was a man they had once seen leaving the building with a box in his hands, who was now designing the company's new future. James didn't return to the building again. He didn't need to. His work spoke for him. The name Carter and Soul began to spread to other cities. High-end clients, renowned architects, invitations to design fairs. But James remained the same, humble, grateful, silent. He kept his workshop in the garage, now expanded, but still smelling of wood and hot coffee. His daughter sometimes painted on the scraps of wood as she had done in the past. Life had returned, better than before. One quiet evening, as he sanded a new piece, James stopped for a moment. He placed his hand over his heart and took a deep breath. "Thank you, God," he whispered. "Not for the money, not for the success, but for the fall. Because without the fall, he would never have discovered the strength he always had within him. He didn't just regain a place in the market. He regained himself. And that, no one could take that away." That same week, he received an unexpected call. A company had made a formal offer to buy part of Carter and Soul. The name? Bennett & Co. They wanted to acquire the brand. James listened in silence. And then, with the serenity of someone who understands that he is now driving his own story, he answered, "You don't buy what you once threw away. You build your own, or you learn to live with the regret." And he hung up, not out of pride, but because finally, he was at peace. James now wakes up with no alarm clock. His days begin with quiet prayer, the scent of fresh wood, and the sound of his daughter's laughter echoing from the kitchen. There's no rush, no fear of explosive emails, no closed doors. He builds, he teaches, he serves. What once was pain became a legacy. The garage has become a workshop of dreams, not just his, but of apprentices who now learn under him, men who were also discarded, and now find a second chance with their hands and faith.